So welcome everyone to our first DataXperts event.
Well, I just want to open this event, and I hope it's the first event out of a series of many events about data and AI. We will talk a lot about AI, but let's also remember that our models are as good as our data, so really most of the breakthroughs that we will talk about today happened through the fact that we have today much more data. I can tell you my personal story. Some 30 years ago, I was a frustrated computer science student doing my master's. And I opened the newspaper. I'm Israeli, so it was in Israel, and I saw that there is some seminar in Jerusalem. So you know, as a student, you are looking for pleasure, travel. So I went to a room where there were about 30 to 40 people, and they were discussing something that was called neural networks. The interesting thing was that in this room were mathematicians, there were physicians, there were psychologists, there were biologists, and probably some others that I cannot classify them. And in fact, the discussion was coming from computer science. Most of my work at that time was how to do things. A lot of if then else, some of it more intelligent, some of it less intelligent, but in this room, the discussion was about how to learn. And I can say that from my perspective, trying to understand, how we learn, how to make a machine learn, made a big change in my life. In fact, I took a decision to go for a PhD in this really niche domain of neural networks. And since then, I'm living in this area, doing different things. I'm using to say that my career is around making predictions, and at least 30 years ago I had one good prediction, I can say for sure. So for me, it's it's a matter that to see these times really it's inspiring, because it's a recognition of something that started many years ago, was not possible. And now you can find the other side, that many people think that you can do anything with it. So I think that in this day we will cover some of the breakthroughs or the status of where we are. I will be the devil advocate, and I will try also to bring up the challenges and things that that we are not everything is solved, and then we will have a discussion about ESG. Before heading to Ramine, this is some kind of food for thought. There are no free meals. On the left-hand side, you see ChatGPT. We estimate that every day there is 30 million users. On the average, each one asks 5 questions to the chatbot. The result is 25 tons of CO2 emission. Okay, this is per day. It's 522 tons, and it's equivalent to the use of emission of 605 Americans, which is much more than twice. But I want to say that there is a cost we are solving things, but we're creating other problems, and I think we can talk about it when we talk about ESG, about the cost, but also maybe the opportunity of using AI to handle that. And by the way, on the right-hand side, you have other numbers. This is Google. So Google is emitting 2 orders of magnitude more than ChatGPT, 1,325 tons of CO2 per day. It's a result of about 7 billion queries. And if we take the equivalent of a car, it's a car that travels every day 6.7 million kilometers. Okay, so a lot of travel. So ChatGPT, which is more AI, Google has also a lot of AI, put some carbon into there, but let's not forget that we are starting from a base where other technologies are sending a lot, and this is some of the challenges we talk about today. So without further words, and sorry about the typos because these slides were made 5 minutes before the presentation, but I hope you got. By the way, this artwork was done by DALI, which is a software that you can ask her to paint something in different styles. I asked the software to paint lonely robot eating dinner. So that's for thought, and Ramine is.
Well, good morning, everyone. An absolute pleasure to be here. I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so going through a couple of areas which I think are around state of the art. But I think, as we heard from Dr.Shuki, there is so much history in this space, right? There is so much depth and research and work that's gone in to get to where we are today. And what I want to share a little bit around the maturity of where we are today. Both maturity from an industry lens, so what we're doing across the different industries, finance in particular. What does state of the art look like? What does it mean when we take state of the art and start applying that to the future of banking? And then finally, just kind of like the bring it home is, what about responsible, right? What about responsible AI and how does that apply to our work? So hopefully it's not too boring, not too much math. I usually say like bring out your calculators and we're going to do some calculus, but not today. So, all right, so let's kick things off. So the first thing I always wanted to share is a little bit about some of the work we do kind of Accenture to understand why should we invest in AI? Is it meaningful or not? And a study that we did over the last couple of years was to look at a longitudinal study on how companies effectively use AI within their, whether it's their back office, middle office, front office, depending on the structure and the nature of the organization, and how it affects ultimately their revenue, how it affects the way they drive their business, interact with their customers, and do their day-to-day activities. And no surprise, but at least we have some data now to actually prove what we say, is that those organizations which started early, right, they started maybe 2016, 15, thinking about data, thinking about how we take a basic process, 4 people involved in it, how do we optimize that process, bring in some intelligence, reduce it to 2 people, get those 2 people to do other things, and effectively drive that workload, drive that process using data and analytics. Those companies that did this, moving forward over a few years, we see a significant increase, something like 6 to 7%, compared to those that don't kind of engage in those activities in their overall revenue. So effectively, take away from this is those that are starting early are seeing an absolute increase in their revenue streams. And it's not just in one industry, it's cross-cutting across industries. We see it in banking, we see it in healthcare, we see it in government. So this is the green tick for everyone to say, we really need to be investing in it. And we need to invest in it early, and we need to invest it across our organization. But the reality is, it's not as simple as just putting money down and saying, hey, we're going to do data and AI, hey, we're going to build some neural network or some models. We need to really think about what does it mean to actually do this. And again, part of the study, we looked at how do people actually do this in their organization and how do we be effective in it. And nice little graph to start falling off, but effectively there's 4 quadrants here, or 4 areas. And we separated it into kind of the ones that are building things, the early adopters, those that are kind of just playing around in the space, maybe they have a few initiatives across the organization, and those that are the achievers, the ones that are actually making a difference in the organization. And no surprise, the ones that are really making a difference, the ones towards the right, the achievers and the builders, are far and few between. They're not the majority. And I would just like to firstly say, I'm lucky to work with Dr.Shuki and DataX and across the bank, and I see you guys and I see the work that you're doing really in that space. You're the achievers, you're the ones that are actually putting in the effort to actually build in data and analytics into every line of business and every piece of work that you do. So I think it's always good just to take a second and reflect on where you are and what you're doing and the fantastic work you're doing. So that being said, let's talk about state of the art. I always like to start things off with a bit of a funny slide, which is, 1950s, you had Alan Turing trying to build Enigma and understand how you make a Turing-complete machine. For those that don't know that kind of stuff, don't worry about it, but effectively, digital to analog, big machines with lots of cogs. And now, we're moving forward and we start to see things like ChatGPT and that, right, where we can start to ask questions and we hope it's returning as a sensible human-like response. But reality is we're probably still quite far away from your Skynet, your Sarah Connor searching bot. We're not there yet, but what we are doing is we're starting to build broader mechanisms in the AI space to be able to do more general intelligence tasks. And I try and use this as the kind of the y-axis. Is just when I started off, in the early days, not me, but someone did, of computing and thinking about how do we make machines to think, they were doing very unique binary tasks, right? They would say, I can do this, but I can't do anything around the world that I'm not told to do. But what we're starting to see over the years is that these bots, and who remembers Clippy, if anyone had that on their Microsoft Word, I'm sure you hated it and tried to disable it, but it helped you do very specific things, right? You would say, hey, do you need to increase your font size? Do you need to do this? It was trained to do those tasks. And what we're starting to see now is these models, which we'll talk about in a bit, or these systems that come together to be able to do broader tasks. And that general intelligence is the trajectory we're starting to see. And that's really important to understand because as we're seeing advancements of AI for different types of activities, whether it's helping you as an advisor or helping you drive your car, that level of general intelligence has to increase, otherwise you're never going to be able to do more and more tasks, and thus you're going to need more computational systems to do many different things. So the other thing I think which is important, I think Dr.Shuki made this point, when you joined that workshop and you sat in the room with those philosophers and the sociologists and physicists, they're probably looking at small, basic neural networks with small amounts of data to drive it. But what we're seeing now, and it's really a factor of Moore's law, which is computational power, or the amount of chips, the amount of density in the chip that can double every kind of 18 months, is that the power that the cloud is providing for us to take data and train larger and larger models is increasing, not exponentially, but at a rate that we didn't imagine at the very beginning. And it's also fueled by the way we generate data ourselves. So it's kind of somewhat self-fulfilling. We end up producing data because we go and browse services, we play with mobile applications. All of those are data points. You collect those data points, you take these large kind of cloud providing services like AWS, Amazon, Google, and suddenly you end up in this space where you have a lot of data and you can start to train very large models. And obviously the mathematics behind those models have to increase as well and be more refined, but ultimately as we start increasing that space, our ability to be able to use those data points to actually build models is phenomenal. And as a result, if you've ever followed the space of IBM's Deep Blue when they played games of chess or Go, you can see that actually some of these systems, again, in a very narrow space, can outperform human intelligence or outperform the ability for humans to beat the machine. And that's quite a fundamental thing, what we're saying here, is that in these specific unique tasks, a machine can outperform a human. So that means for specific tasks in our organization or in our day-to-day, we can use that to augment the things that we do. I think a great example was, I was very much a fan of computer vision back in the day, and building all these fun things. And back in 2012, they came up with this neural network, these convolutional neural networks. And AlexaNet was one of the new architectures they came out. And there's this famous experiment that they do every year with this data set, which is effectively, if I'm given a number of images, can I predict the object in the image? And they compare it to a human, a set of humans to be able to predict the objects. And it's always been like 20% error, 15% error, and then the year and the human error rate is around 3.5% to 4%. They brought out this model, they trained it with a large corpus of data. They brought it to the academic experimentation, which is effectively one of the presentations and one of the conferences, and it performed at 3.6%. And suddenly people were like, oh my, this is a breakthrough. And since then, now it's accelerated, we've gone down to like 1.something% error rate. And that rate of change is phenomenal. And I think that's just a true testament to the amount of research and commitment that's gone into this space. So, I just want to talk a little bit about the domains, and you'll see why I'm going to this in a minute. But I always try and classify when I think about AI, because people go, oh, AI is everything. I'm like, no, AI really is solving some quite unique tasks, right? And you put them together, it can do some really complex things. So Tesla, it can self-drive a vehicle because it's using a system of work. It's using computer vision models, it's using sensors, it's using other types of technology to bring it all together. So you boil it down, you end up with these 5 key pillars. I thought an interesting one I'd add there for you, maybe you haven't heard of, maybe something you can go off and Google afterwards, is sensory AI. So a piece of research outside of just looking at text and looking at images, is going to look at smells, it's going to look at the environment and take in a smell, decompose what those compounds of the smell is, the chemical composition, and then predict what the actual thing that's producing it is. Just imagine the implications, the impact of that. Say you're in a dangerous environment and there's lots of gas, maybe you want to know there's a gas rising, and you can't tell it just by computer vision because gas is invisible. But if you start to build machine learning models that can predict the chemical compound, which is ultimately methane or whatever it may be, suddenly it's a very useful tool. So we start to see these kind of different areas emerge, and I'm sure if you come from the finance world, you're very familiar with time series modeling, if you're Arenas and Sarimax folks, or you're LSTM guys if you're in the kind of modern space. But ultimately, what I wanted to show is they use this common box underneath, these common methods. And these common methods are the things that are somewhat interchangeable. And what we're seeing over the current kind of pace of research and the current space that we've been kind of working in, is they're converging. So when everyone talks about neural networks, or we see about these large language models, underneath the hood there's a couple of tools and a couple of methods that they're using to make this possible. So whether it's representing the data in a certain way, because computers don't understand text, and they don't understand images, they understand numbers, right? So it's about how we represent the data. Or the next thing is, how do we model that data? They are all starting to use common techniques. So when we are building and trying to experiment with these new models and new ways of doing things, we're starting to lean and starting to see research just keep exploring this. So one takeaway could be, is this the only way that we do things? We don't know. So in the future, there could be additional ways of doing things. So always important to recognize that this space is going to keep growing. So everyone's talking about ChatGPT and generative AI, so I thought nothing more timely than talk about it today. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro to it, and just give you some of the thinkings in this space right now, because I thought maybe a few takeaways. So if you've seen this before, I'm sure you have: descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, and now generative. I agree somewhat to this, but ultimately we see this trajectory between things that just describe something, to predicting it, to generating effectively scenarios, which is the best way to do it, to now generating even new scenarios that we've never even seen before. So how do we describe generative AI? Well, it's taking all of those research things I showed you before, data representations, models. It's taking data that it's been trained on, and what can it do? It can predict things in a domain of data that it's never seen before. And the easiest way to understand that, if a model was trained on data that can tell between 0 and 10, the model can now predict things which are 11 to unknown, right? And that is where generative AI's power and capabilities are. But again, with all of these things, as we've seen, if you've used ChatGPT, or if you've even just played with generative AI outside of the open AI world, it's not perfect. There are lots of different caveats to using it. And unless you understand those, putting those into production and using them every day can be lots of issues and areas that emerge. So when we think about generative AI or OpenAI right now, ChatGPT or GPT-4 or GPT-3, we kind of like zoom in directly to text. Hey, it's going to answer me some text. We're going to answer me some answers about what I give as an input. But that's not the only place that you see it. So I think Dr.Shuki showed this earlier, the picture of the robot on the side eating the not so looking happy food. That's a form of generative AI, right? So what it's doing is taking images from the web, images that it's crawled, training a model to be able to convert effectively text to image and then image to generation. We'll go into the details, but ultimately it's generating new unseen observations based on the text that you're giving it, the representations of the semantics in that text. And that is a great example of how generative AI is not just in the text space, not just in one domain. It's a good example that we're seeing right now is from text to code to image to speech, video, 3D, etc., etc. All underneath, all again, like we said before, they use the same components, whether it's diffusion models or rather some form of transformer architecture. Again, falls back to the same work that we see. It's kind of building upon that capability. More data, more math, more thinking, innovation, we end up in this space. I think some of the really interesting examples is not to replace coders, because developers, engineers, you always need them. You need the thinkers, you need the ability to effectively innovate outside of the standard day-to-day routine of writing some functions. But what we're seeing, especially in some of our clients, and even inside of some of the product companies, is the speed to develop certain things. It may be just documentation. You write some really good code, I don't want to go and document it. It takes a while to document it. So rather than effectively a human going along and documenting everything, let's use automated systems like Autopilot to help you kind of effectively document and enhance your code and enhance productivity. I'd rather have my developer do something else than rather spend them doing documentation. Great examples of that we're seeing. I think other things as well is around design. So we work with another agency in the US where they have to generate all the time different types of designs. Big agency, and I mean graphical designs. They're using now these systems to help them prompt ideas, not to generate the full image, but to prompt certain bits in the design to think about patterns and textures and gradients. All of those things are kind of very possible with the use of these technologies. I want to just say it's not just OpenAI. So we see a lot of the stuff forming around OpenAI and they're very public and what they're doing, but to say that they're the only ones is kind of misleading. There is so much work going on in this space where generative models or just even the concept of using the generative architectures, so transformer architectures or other form of architectures are leading to effectively these companies publishing their models. And one thing that's not on there, I don't think, but I would definitely recommend you guys to go and do if you're into this kind of like hands-on piece, go to huggingface.io. It's an open repository of lots of open source models. We play with them, we always use them. They're really fantastic if you want to engage and start to kind of interact and understand a little bit more about this space. So let's just focus in a little bit about the future of banking. So as I mentioned, for these, historically, we've used traditional modeling, maybe it's for certain lines of business, maybe you're in the risk function, and you use your traditional regression models to evaluate, and you have your additional models to go and validate those models make sense for your derivative markets, whatever it may be. But we're starting to see, and if we kind of did a bit of a map here, and this is just effectively a kind of overview of the different functions in the bank, we're seeing different applications for the use of generative AI and the use of modern AI techniques across banking. So just to give you a lay of the land, the different colors represents different levels of impact those potentially could have, up to 30%, and the transformative kind of capabilities they will lead to. So typically, if you're a wealth advisor, you're going to be reading through lots of reports and lots of, we'll see this in a minute, lots of statements, and then making recommendations for your clients. Well, potentially in the future, when you can start to use summarization techniques or other ways to distill information, then potentially these things could improve the way you do things, not only distill facts, but also accelerate the way you work with your clients. Super meaningful in the world that we live in right now, where everything is so fast moving. If anyone watched some of the news recently. Again, across the industry, another great example that we're looking at right now with one of the regulators is around KYC and AML. So we're going to hear a little bit around AML later in our panel and the impact of it that it has, on people and society. But ultimately, when you start to think about the AML space, anti-money laundering space, you think about trying to discover patterns of activity. And I'm not an expert in this, but ultimately I need to be able to find the good guys and the bad guys, right? And the people that are doing malicious activity, I need to have some good representation of what they do and how they behave to be able to detect those patterns. Whether it's the way we interact as people and communicate, maybe it's the way we do transactions, those are super important. And the use of generative AI we're working with in a small kind of prototype is how do we generate new scenarios? So effectively, I know people do things in 10 different ways, but potentially there's a whole universe of ways that people are doing things that I don't even know about. So the topology of the way people do things and interact with transactions are made. So we're looking at how do we take generative AI, generate these new scenarios, and then reevaluate them in the sense of, does that make sense as a anti-money or a money laundering pattern? And we're placing that against the original data that we have to evaluate, did we miss something when we used to kind of detect it using traditional ways? So really exciting kind of applications of it there, and meaningful, right? Because you're starting to generate new scenarios and you use that for detection. So we did have an animation. I was told no animations today, so I had to flatten it. And I just wanted to kind of get you thinking about this. And this is a real example. This is not mocked up. I actually ran this 2 nights ago just to see if it worked. And it's an example of using SCBX's financial statement from last year. And it's a long document, a very, very long document, lots of facts, lots of data points. And I asked myself, could I distill these data points? I don't want to effectively use ChatGPT to tell me something. I want to give data to ChatGPT and tell me how to summarize it. I want to use its summarization capabilities. But I don't just want to summarize those points. I want to know the relationship between those data points. Because everything is related. We're in this room right now, Dr.Shuki's in front of me, Zach's in front of me. It's all relative, right? And there's certain semantics in the way we are related, which is meaningful in facts. And if you come from, unfortunately I come from a graph background, so I care about these things. If you care about graphs and understanding representations of knowledge, this is quite meaningful. So the example here, 1, 2, 4, is I take a financial statement, I use a prompt which is, hey, tell me the network structure, the semantics of the facts in this document I'm going to tell you about, and provide me an output which is then useful for me to understand the relevancy of facts and the relatedness of them. And this is just a snapshot of what it produced. But just imagine this in the hands of like a wealth advisor, or an RM, or an analyst. Suddenly you're changing the way they think about the problem. And without, there's obviously risks in this, they may have got the facts wrong, we need to go and validate. But this is just kind of a glimpse into what the type of things that we can start to do. And it's not just generative AI have been doing this, we've been doing this with large language models for a while, where we've been following the Muppets versions of the models coming out, or if you've been playing in the space for, outside of this in the neural network space and the RNNs. But ultimately we can do these kind of experiments with it. So I'm probably way over on time. So I'm going to speed this bit up. I haven't got any flags yet that says don't speak anymore, so I'll go through this, see what I'm laughing. Okay, so responsible AI. So I talked about all these cool things and all of these great innovations, but we have to be grounded in what we do, and we have to be realistic in what that means for people, what that means for society, what that means for the systems that we build. If you get on an aircraft and you don't trust the system when you get on it, you probably don't even think about it right now, right? But if you come from a comp sci or a software engineering background, and there's a couple in the room, you know about BSpec and you know about models. Effectively, you write a model which actually represents the completeness of your code, right? The completeness of the execution. It's super formal methods, right, that you need to write to be able to generate an aircraft system to allow things to fly. If you don't do that, things can go wrong and you don't know where it's going wrong. In the same way, when we build our models, we need to understand the dimensions that we're thinking about, what the implications are. There's technical implications. Hey, good morning. There's technical implications, but there's also the societal implications into what we do. So there's always this nice kind of pillar of all the risks that we think about when we build models and we build kind of AI systems, whether it's the ethical things, whether it's about inclusion and diversity, whether it's around the job apocalypse. People think their jobs are going to disappear. I think we can safely say we're not seeing that, and it's probably nowhere in the near future we're going to see things where people's line of business is going to be completely automated. But ultimately, we end up having to think about these things and what the implications are when we build our systems. So I'm just going to share one little slide on this. It's around the pillars of responsible AI, because as we get more and more kind of deeper into building our systems, embedding it into our different lines of business, whether it's front office all the way to back, or in different industries, we need to think about these pillars. So whether your models are fair, whether you're including or excluding certain social groups, super important to understand. Whether it's ethical, right? Should you build these machines? Should you build systems where it's automated a workflow or automated a process? The great example of the thought experiment is around, if anyone's seen it, the self-driving car. And you have two groups of people that the car has to decide which one it hits. Does it hit the old people or the young people? Right, what is the ethical decision in that? Should you let a machine make that decision? Or should the automation of that machine stop and the human take over? So all of these things are important. Accountability, when we build these models and you make a decision and something happens, who's accountable for it? Where does it roll back to? And I'll go on, so on and so forth, but transparency, we need to know how things are made. So, a little bit of the theory. Hopefully everyone's still awake. And I'm going to hand over to Dr.Shuki now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the practice.
I will talk about other things, but I will touch responsible AI. In fact, I want to focus on making things real and how AI looks in reality, in actual use. And as I said before, I will be a bit devil's advocate, but not an optimistic one, because I want to talk a bit about the challenges and things we should think about. And there are no miracles. A few years ago, everyone was speaking about the Internet of Things. This would be the Big Bang. 2 years ago, blockchain. A few months ago, metaverse. So there are a lot of miracles that people talk about, but there is no miracle. And I want to put things a bit to the ground. Again, AI is here to stay. It's not a buzzword anymore, but I'll try to make things real. This is, by the way, the picture that DALI created for AI walking on a beach in Thailand. So I will talk a bit about what is AI for us working in financial institution, how we try to apply where it makes sense. I will touch about the challenges, but at the same time I will try to give some tips so you come out with something meaningful to apply in your work. A bit of positioning. We're talking a lot about AI. I started the day by telling you about 30 years ago, and I can tell that until a few years, maybe 6 years or something like that, nobody, at least in my domain, was courageous enough or charlatan enough to talk about AI, about artificial intelligence, because we felt that we are very far from AI, and now I will touch it later, but now I think we are getting there. Basically, artificial intelligence is a set of techniques. We talk today a lot about neural networks, about machine learning, but in fact there are things were invented before and are still used. You can think about expert systems. So So a system where someone puts rules, says if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that, and then you have a situation and the engine needs to find, in fact, the bottom result or conclusion. It was used and used a lot still in, for example, in fault in identification in repair. So an expert says if the temperature of the engine goes about 50, it might be that maybe there is no water in the engine, maybe the engine is running too fast, etc. And then there are other rules that say if there are no water in the engine, it might be that someone did not put water, there is a leakage in the engine, etc., etc., etc. And then in use, you come to the system, you say, my engine is running hot, and the deduction will go and test, is there water in the engine through the sensor, and continue the deduction until it will say, there is leakage or there is hole or whatever. So techniques like that exist and will stay to exist, but in fact, in the recent year, machine learning took place, and machine learning means, in fact, learning from examples. So if an expert system can live just from a set of rules, machine learning needs example, needs data in order to be intelligent. And then deep learning, which is a sub area of algorithms, which are mainly based on neural networks, is what we are became, the hero of today's. Still in machine learning, there are other algorithms, decision trees, graph algorithms, etc. An area which is touching all this is NLP, natural language processing. So this is understanding what is our language, how is the construct of the language, what is the relationship between things, what is intent. There are a lot of computational NLP, and deep learning became, again, a competing technique that today overtakes the computational technique and the statistical technique. So if we talk about GPT-4, it lives in the deep learning area. ChatGPT is in fact a combination of GPT-3.5 and NLP, and this is where we live. Before I move on, what is artificial intelligence? So not many people can say, we have here one definition, but going back to what Ramine talks about, the guy that broke the Enigma machine in the Second World War, Turing, when he was asked to explain what is artificial intelligence, he was not able to explain, but he defined the test. The test is called the Turing test. So we have a man that sits and he has a curtain in front of him, and he exchanges information with the something which is behind the curtain. It might be a machine, it might be a human, and if the person cannot identify if it's a human or a machine, then what is behind the curtain is artificial intelligence, if it's a machine. So are we there? I will leave it open. We are chatting today with ChatGPT. If we didn't know that it's a machine, would we think that it's a human, or we leave it open? Being a data scientist and machine learning, I want also to respect the other areas in science and engineering. So, what we are trying to solve is customer needs. There are other techniques, programming, whatever, that can do some stuff. There is AI, and in order to use AI, on one hand, we should say that these methods are not good enough, so we're looking to improve. And again, if it's good enough, no need to bother. In order to do that, we need also to have enough examples or data. and in some cases also typed examples, so we know what is what. So really the Goldilocks zone, it's something that is taken from astronomy. When we look at solar systems and planets, there are areas where human beings or living creatures can live. So the Goldilocks zone in our system is between us and Mars, and everything which is more closer to the sun is too hot, everything that is beyond that is too cold. So this is the area where we should look for living things, but in this context is where is the area that we should look in applying AI. So the right place is something that can answer the customer need. Other methods are not good enough, and we have enough data to solve that. So my other citation is that we are talking a lot about AI, but we shouldn't use it as the only thing. We can do today. There is a concept which says we can do everything with AI. No, and so if you have a hammer, in this case it's AI, everything looks like an A, but that's not the situation. So I started this story a bit before about my history, and in fact, after this 2 or 3 years of interest in neural networks, the world went into what we call the winter of AI or the desert of AI. And as I said, we didn't dare to say the word AI, but today when we look back, it's called the desert of AI. Still, I found work. I had a job. Even with this knowledge, and there was these early adopters that wanted to have a proof. So anytime we went with a project to a telco operator who wanted to predict, who will churn or wanted to predict who will buy the next product, etc. We had to take data to show that we can predict the past, etc. So it was painful, but still. I could earn my living, and now we are in what is called the spring of AI. Hopefully there will be also summer, and this is what Dali painted when I asked her to paint AI in springtime. Looks like somewhere in Japan or Sakura or whatever. So what happened? We have much more data. When I did my PhD, it was on identifying handwritten letters or digits. Today, the NIST database is some kind of novice database to start learning data science. I had less than that, so less than 10,000 examples. There was no YouTube, there was no Instagram. Go and search for data. We have today, in fact, unlimited compute power. And at that time, I was working with my workstation in the lab. Today, you have the cloud. The cloud, you can get as much as you need when you need it. We can build much more complicated models, and what we are talking, and I'll show you a bit numbers later on. With complexity, there is capability. The belief in the community created open source, and the open source community also creates library. You can cut and paste or ask ChatGPT to find it for you, but you can accelerate. There is recognition, and this is related to human parity. And this is some kind of where human parity looks like. So what Ramine mentioned, 2016, it's the place where machine can overperform people in identifying object in an image. So saying if it's a dog, if it's a tool, if it's whatever. And you can see that speech, reading, translation, conversation, So every year or less than a year, we achieve human parity in more domains. One caveat, these are static tests. Okay, when we look at an image, we look at an image. When we listen to speech, we listen to speech. The reality is not like that. When I look at you, I hear you, I see your lips moving, if I'm not blind, etc., etc. And really, this is some of the challenges and the tips that we as humans get, and the machine doesn't have it. So this human parity even goes beyond what we call parity. So today, you don't need to convince someone that AI can work, but this creates expectations, and in some cases we have to be aware that expectations are inflated. And going back to my other slide, AI is great, but we have to be realistic. And just to illustrate that, this is what Dali illustrated when I asked her to do Turing test for artificial intelligence. So you see over there what I found by typing this thing in Google, which came up with this little diagram of a man sitting behind the scene and doing the Turing test. And this is what Dali gave me. Okay, so not very successful. We have to remember that we are talking about statistics, and if we ask ChatGPT about what should CISO do in an organization, you will find many job descriptions on the net and can come with something which is reasonable. If we ask him about Turing test, not sure what he found. We have here somebody that maybe looks like a test. There is something which, I don't know who is Turing here, but we see that it's blindfolded, so there are all kinds of hints. But this is to say that we need to balance our expectation. This is another example. I'm not sure it's better. This is another one. The writing is not understood it, for me at least. So that's put things into context. So what is the money for us in finance? When we look at the big chunks, and here we are looking at currently, the big area is marketing and sales. The second one is risk, and the third one is around efficiencies. We can see here a smaller breakdown for things which are related to growth and things which are related to savings. We can see here all kinds of use cases, and we see impacts. So it's encouraging. It's not 100% impact, and it will not be 100% impact. But these numbers, improving things by 1% or 2% is a lot of money. I don't have much time to go over, and explain and give examples, but we will share the slides. But there is research. This one comes from McKinsey. This one comes from another one. But one of the challenges that we as DataX face is, to take this kind of analyst slides and try to say, okay, what do we do tomorrow? First, we need to believe them, and then to decide how to translate them into product, into processes, into other actions. So going back to my my lecture about AI outside the lab. In fact, I found myself a few days ago thinking that I need to make this presentation, and I had no time to do it, so I went to ChatGPT and I asked what are the challenges for implementing artificial intelligence and data science in Fintech? And this is what I got. So I will not go over every point in this presentation because we should stay here for days, and I will try to go over it, but giving you some kind of critique. So first thing is about data quality. Things which are evident for most of us should be accurate, complete, free from biases. I'm not sure. I mean, bias exists in data. How do we fix it? We are learning from history. So if until yesterday we gave loans to people with payroll, we don't have any history in our database of giving loans to people without payroll. So how can we, if you want to use it to do some credit scoring or underwriting, bias is there, so how to deal with it? Regulatory and compliance. So in some places regulation steps in. For example, in some places when I refuse someone a loan, so let's say I got a score from a machine that told me you shouldn't give this person a loan. In some countries and regulations, you need to explain to him. You need to explain to him what kind of criteria he didn't meet. In some cases, you need to explain to him what he needs to do in order to be eligible for a loan. So, how to plug it into a machine that just says us yes or no. This is connected to interpretability and transparency. So, on one hand, there is the explanation which I just mentioned about this loan, which is something to communicate, but also to trust. You know, we want, at the end of the day, we gave loans. Some of them became non-performing loans, some of them performed. Can we understand why? Why loans were not performing, although the machine told us make this loan? Okay, so understanding is critical. Talent shortage, I think it goes without saying. ChatGPT also said that those people which are developers, machine learning and data scientists should understand the complexities of data in our industry, and I tend to agree with that. Integration with legacy system, and this is, we are outside the lab. We are not creating a spreadsheet with numbers. We want it to be connected to systems. So what is the right integration technology? We can say in a nutshell, API is the king in these cases, but it's a challenge how to connect to many different systems. And at the end, beyond legacy system, we have to think that we are not talking about one-time action. It's not about telling someone, do you want to buy this iPhone or not? It's a whole set of activities that the impact may be seen in other places. So my task is to sell the iPhone, or my task is to give the loan, and I want to maximize it. I want to sell as many loans as possible. But at the end of the chain, there is payment, there is collection. So achieving target in one place may ruin something in other places. So how to calibrate, it's a process. It's a process in the chain of models, in the chain of activities, how to maximize that and not a single thing. Last but not least is cost, as always. And it's related to hiring, investment, etc., but I don't think it's a key thing here. So I felt that it's too much information for me to build a detailed presentation, so I asked ChatGPT to think again. And you can see some new things or similar things, but it's not, in fact, it's not the same as before. So we can say that interoperability became explainability, but that's go. But new things came out. Thinking about the processes of collecting data, of processing. Here is thinking about prediction. Here is thinking about decision, which is a completely different thing. So without going into many more details, new things came out, cybersecurity, for example, ethical considerations. So it looks to us like, what is the right answer? Is it the first one? Is it the second one? And I want to go back to my first observation that it's a matter of statistics. If you ask someone a question, the first word that he will put in the sentence will have impact on the second and the third. This is generation. So I can say one thing in many ways, and in some cases the discussion will go in different ways. So we need to be aware of that. As I said, I had, beyond what ChatGPT consulted me, other things to say, but let me leave you with some food for thought. So about the use of ChatGPT, we are talking about a statistical model, something that went to the internet, process a lot of information and gives us some kind of, let's call it an average result. All the small things were not considered, all the things that repeated themselves in different ways were learned. In our business, it's not good enough. We have business logic. The answer it might be, you can get a loan because of you don't have salary. This might not be found in a statistical way. Okay, so we need a combination of the business rules and statistics. To give you an example, something like 4 years ago, I was building bots for banks. And imagine a phone call with the bank, you do your KYC, you are recognized, whatever, and you want to transfer money. So you ask, I want to transfer money, how much do you want to transfer, where to, etc. There is some questions that need to be filled in. But this is the normal process, but in reality is I want to transfer money, how much you want to transfer, 5,000, maybe I have more than one account. From which account do you want to transfer? I want to transfer from this account. There is not enough money in this account. Do you want to use another account? Do I have some stocks that I can sell or some bonds that I can use in order to have this money for transfer? Let's see. So, start a discussion about what to sell, when the money will come in, in which currency do we want to transfer. So, in fact, on one hand, the discussion goes to other domains, selling stocks, currencies, whatever. From another point, there is a lot of logic that needs to be taken into account. If I want to transfer money, I need to have enough money. I cannot transfer if I don't have money. There is logic about the currencies. This account is in this currency, and so all this combination of how to do things, how to incorporate this logic, and at the end, if we want really to use this bot for service, the bot should also be able to monitor the discussion and to know that we now are selling stocks, but at the end, we need, in order to really make it, we need to transfer money. So these are challenges that exist, and if you talk to Microsoft, they will talk with you about hallucination, bot hallucination, which means they say that after you have a discussion for more than 20 questions, the bot may hallucinate. What is hallucinate? He will tell you, things that he might have been smoking something, or out of scope, completely irrational. We saw it on these paintings that you have things with different characters, half man, half fish, whatever. So what happens behind the scene is that the bot identifies things and remembers them and tries to predict what you want from him. So he knows that we are speaking about money transfer. He knows that we are speaking about selling bonds. So as we move in the discussion, in fact, the intent of the discussion becomes less clear. Now we went to another direction, so the intent that looking to changing money becomes more strong. The previous one of transferring money become less relevant to the discussion. So capturing, the essence of the discussion, it's something that for us, normally humans can do it easily, but those machines are not very good at that. How to balance data that we have internally and data that exists outside. If you look at statistics, the web has much more information than what we have in our organization. So if you want to ask something that may exist in our policy, for sure our policy is more important than what is the common thing that is done on the internet, so how to embed that. And there are other things, but I think I'm running out of time, so let me move forward. This is a question, which day is the most challenging day of an AI model? We have doctors in the room. So when I saw this question, someone told me it's the first day of production. When you take things from the whiteboard and from the simulation and go to production. So this is some kind of standard that was created in 1999. You can still find it somewhere in the internet. At that time, people tried to create some kind of a checklist, what you need to do in order to have a good model. And there is a lot of activities, and I still recommend people to look for it and find it. It's a lot of sense, but the basic thing, in this flow, the last mile is deployment. So I went to evaluation, the results are good enough, my scores are great, and then I go to deployment. So this is the first day of production. My current answer is different. I say that the most challenging days are 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, because it's not a one-time exercise anymore. It's not that we are going to do a marketing campaign. We are going to call people, offer them the loan, and then go to some offline analysis, how many we sold, what we have, etc. The things that we are doing now are ongoing. We put a model, it will stay there for some time. It will get new data, it will produce new results. So in fact, the process has changed. Instead of ending here, we are going back at least here and assuming that we understood the problem and we understood the data. And this thing should be living, it should be automated. Okay, and it's challenging, we don't have time to go into that. It's all the things around MLOps, about data quality, etc. And let me take a step on that. So when we look at the data quality, the adaptability, the observability, so those are things that ChatGPT recommended us to look at. How we learn things that have no statistics, okay? So if we take the approach of ChatGPT, it will not work. Because in history we have things that, a fraud event, hacking event, it's something that is always new. And we never saw it before because the fraudsters are more sophisticated than us, unfortunately. How to deal with surprises? I put as a background to this slide Sakura season. Sakura is around March. March 2020 was a special month for me. I was working at Agoda at that time, so promoting hotel with data science, etc. And March was the big hit of COVID. No models work at this Sakura time, everything collapsed. So, how to deal with these surprises, we need to have a plan B. How to improve with time. How to adapt to changing environment. So it's not like small things or big things, but economic change, people behavior change, and how not to be too biased by the past. Again, going back to the fact that what we know is what we have. So on the right hand side, I'm giving you some kind of a view about the iceberg. In fact, what we are watching is we are looking at the service health, our model of working, response time, etc. But underneath we have many moving parts. Some of them are related to our data health, some of them are related to our model health. Okay. So I will run about it. So the short message is that there are tools that can help us answer those questions. There are tools that help us to identify bias, to deal with bias. There are tools that enable us to identify model drift. There are tools that can identify changes in the population, etc., etc., etc. Last but not least is the aspect of risk and explainability, which I mentioned it's important. So innovation, AI is considered a risk. It's not rule-based, it's statistical. The other thing is that risk management processes are highly manual. They are cumbersome and they are slow. This is what we see on the top here is an example of DataX trying to suggest a model to CardX, if I'm not mistaken, going to the MRM committee. So from the moment we submitted for review, it took 2 months to get approved. It took 1 man months of working days, so a person, if we had one person, he had to spend half of his time, dealing with approvals. And for sure, this is not scalable. Okay, this is for one model, for one company. if we want to deploy in scale, we need to get into agreement with the risk management authorities. We need to measure things in production. We need to automate. We need to identify risks as they happen and move the balance to there instead of doing it on paper. Okay? This thing I already talked about it, that to maximize the potential of AI means that we are using a multi-model chain and we need to optimize it looking at the chain and also its activity. We are working with the statistical model and our model is good as our data at a certain point of time. Talking about statistics, this is the number of parameters that ChatGPT-3 has. It's about 10 to the order of 11. Okay? This is ChatGPT-4. It looks much bigger, but it's about 1,000 times larger. It's 10 to the order of 14. What does it mean? How many examples do we need in order to have a good model? So it's a very mathematical question, depends on the type of model, depends on the data, etc. But a thumb rule is we need 10 examples per parameter. So it means that in order to GPT to study well, it has 10 to the 11 parameters. We need 10 to the 13 examples. So it's very, you cannot think about many things that have so many examples. I'm talking here about ChatGPT-3. So a lot of the task is that we need is to have more and more data, unfortunately or fortunately. And you know, since we are talking about statistics, we can have a more reliable statistic with the information. So collecting more and more information is crucial to any advance we can do in this domain. By the way, just to give you an order of magnitude, 10 to the power of 14 is the number of neuron that connection between neurons we have in our head. So we have this amount of neuron in our head to the power of 11, and each neuron is connected to about 1,000. So we are talking about 10 to 14. So we are talking, ChatGPT has, let's say, the capacity of the brain already, but still the brain can do much more in much less power. We are a machine of about 100 watt. Okay, so like the charger of our laptop, ChatGPT requires many more watts, can do less things, so still a place to improve. I think my last slide about risk and explainability. So we should consider the use case and the value chain. So we as data scientists, typically we look at the accuracy of predictions, but the use of the model, in fact, is the real place to assess the risk. If I use it for a death or life matter, it's a different question than if I use it to sell an iPhone. Okay, so if we want to comply to what we are looking, we as scientists, we should always look at the use case, but also at the value chain. What will happen in the next step of the process, etc. Risk management should move from design to production. To avoid surprises, don't just measure performance, but the entire flow of ML. Use granular point of view. Don't look at everything with at the same time, but look at the segments of your data, because in order to detect small changes that may affect some people, you cannot look at everyone at the same time. Compare different versions in parallel, so one models, shadow models, do testing, multi-arm bandits, etc. Collaboration and empowerment of different people in this chain, it becomes even more and more crucial. And at the end of the day, to relax the consideration of risk people, you should add in addition some white box methods, so be able to explain. I'm using the sentence that said that one image is worth 1,000 words. I say an insight is more valuable than 1,000 prediction. So I think that's it. As I said, I touched the tip of the iceberg, and hopefully we will have many more events like that, and we can continue and drill into more details. Thank you.
I think over the next 60 minutes, I'm going to ask a few questions and get some discussions going around ESG. For those that don't know, we're going to learn what it is, and we're going to know a little bit more about the impact. I want to use this session to be interactive as well, so if you guys have burning questions any way through, put your hands up, scream at me, shout, wave your arms, whatever, and I will try and field those questions. And we also have some dedicated time at the end to get things going. So, to kick things off, I'm going to ask Alison. Alison is my colleague, so I did have a chance to have a little bit of a chat with her before this, to tell us all about what ESG actually is and what does it mean for the world.
Thank you, Ramine, and it's just wonderful to be here. It's about 4 or 5 years, I'm just thinking, since the last time I was in SCB, and I wasn't in SCBX, so I was in the other building, and this is lovely. Thank you for having me. Okay, so the first thing is, I think ESG is something that is out everywhere, everything everywhere all at once. And we see it on the TV, we see it in newspapers, we see it in every marketing proposition. And there is so much confusion about what ESG is, what sustainability is. And just to put a little bit of context, you might think Accenture, sustainability, we know you guys as tech, we know you guys as AI. But Accenture has had a sustainability business for 20 years. And for the past 15 years, we have been the UN Global Compact, which is where all of the global CEOs get together. We have been their partner on sustainability. Okay? And in the past, and I've been lucky enough in all of that time, because I've been in Accenture a long time, to be able to see how the evolving thinking is with CEOs. And it started off that this was very much something that was on the side of companies, was something that was like CSR, and it has become increasingly core, to the extent that in the last survey, which was published about a month ago, 98% of CEOs globally say that this is their number 1 or number 2 priority as a CEO. So it's become completely mainstream, and that is, really important to remember. Now, ESG is about the how and the what. What I want to do is just spend 2 minutes on the why, because I think everybody forgets the why. Why are we talking about this, and why now? And I think maybe COVID brought it home to many of us. E is about the terrible, terrible things that we're doing to the planet, to the people on the planet. And if you look at just a couple of data points, if you look at the pace of global warming, we are warming faster than we ever have in human history because of humans. We are losing biodiversity at a phenomenal rate, anything between 10x and 1,000x, depending on whether it's in sea, whether it's in salt water, whether it's in non-salt water, whether it's in the forests. we are losing biodiversity at an incredible rate, again, all because of humans. So when you ask me what ESG is about, actually it's about survival. And I used to hear people say this and I think it's nonsense, but it is. It's about survival. And the science, I've spent time now with the scientists, the science is irrefutable. And it's really profound for us in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in the top 10 countries that are going to be impacted by climate change, the top 10. And also the industries in Thailand, if you look at the travel industry, it has an enormous footprint on global warming, but it's critical for the economy. You look at farming, massive impact on waste, on water, but it's critical for Thailand. And you look at manufacturing, again, huge impacts. And then you look at the social side, and I hope we talk more about social side, because the one thing that's happened, the good thing that's happened in the last few years, is people, companies, individuals truly understand that the social impacts are huge, and every single person, every single company has a role to play in actually helping societies, particularly in our part of the world, where the gap has become greater through COVID. So for me, I'm really sad to say, ESG is a great start because it's going to be some of the what we need to do. But when I think about things, and I really think about survival, and I know that's a big word, but it's really serious. So, sorry, Ramine, back to you.
Thank you. Powerful, but no, super powerful. I think hearing that word survival, it kind of brings up a lot of fears, doesn't it? At the same time, it's like, well, is it the end of the world? Is it the way we work and the way we live is slightly different? So thank you, Alison. I think on that note, Dennis, not an easy question now to answer, but I think I just wanted to think a little bit now opportunity. So we kind of now know the space of what ESG is about. Hopefully not the planet ending too soon, but things that we've got to do differently and the opportunities that exist from that. So I think the first question I really wanted to ask for yourself and from the lens of the CTO at SCBX is what is the opportunities that we kind of now have in front of us? You know, given that survival is the big question, how do we achieve that? What is the kind of opportunities that lie for us and maybe from your lens as well that you're seeing?
I take this one. So thanks, and I think the first thing I actually want to say is like sustainability and ESG is an important topic for us at SCBX. We take this very, very seriously, and we have our commitment to move along. The way we look at it and the way the opportunity and obligations, I don't think it's only opportunities, also about obligation. We broadly can look into two categories. Obviously, we work on our own ESG with our commitment 2030, 2050 basically, but we also look at it, what does that mean for the country, for the society, for the ecosystem that we actually are part of, and think about it, what can we contribute to support the transition, because Alison, you mentioned you have travel, we have also a big manufacturing footprint, which is very tied into global supply chains, which also means there are obligations that are passed out to these suppliers because they participate in global supply chains and they have to meet the requirements. However, a lot of them are not the size of the scale that it's an easy transition for them, and it's also not something where they can actually afford to throw a lot of investment at it. So we also look at like what can we do to support that transformation. Technology is obviously a big driver for that. Data is a big driver for that to support this transformation. And as you can see, for those of you who looked into our investor presentation, our strategy, we put that climate tech actually as one of the growth areas for us, and grows from, as I said, like not just opportunity perspective, but also obligation perspective. Because if we cannot support transitioning the country, the economy, we can also not sustain ourselves, right? So that's why I think for me it's also an obligation, not just an opportunity if we look into it, right? So broadly, as I said, like if we look at like what it means for us, it means obviously we do what we can and we're transitioning more and more into a technology-driven company, which means from an energy perspective, our footprint becomes much more focused on enabling technologies. One of the things that I help from the group perspective perspective is our cloud center of excellence, where energy consumption and looking at that and making that part of the business case, what we actually want to move, is one of the things we look at. We also look obviously to build businesses that can support things like financial inclusion, which is a big part. We have a lot of ABACUS here in the room, which is part of that, actually one of our subjects. But it's not just ABACUS, it's overall to help with more financial inclusion, enabling that. We drive that through. But the participation in broader transformation, climate tech, what we can do for that, I think that is the real obligation and opportunity for us, and we as at the senior leadership of the group are extremely committed around that and take that quite serious. And while I cannot share a lot of details what's actually on the roadmap, I can tell you that there will be things coming down the path, and as I said, like, it's a committed area for us to look into.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that. I think just hearing that, those items are on top of the mind and on the agenda coming up in the future is a critical thing. I think I just wanted to, you mentioned something around social inclusion, and ESG is not just about the environment, it's about society as a whole. Dr. Natth, I think, based on your role at ABACUS and the work that you're doing, can you share a little bit more around how you tackle that, the S pillar of the ESG?
Sure. So let me give you some context in case you haven't heard about SCBX. So we are a technology company that have the vision to try to use the technology to promote financial inclusion, so that everyone will have a greater chance at improving their life qualities. In order to achieve that vision, we embrace two of the sustainable development goals from the United Nations, namely the no poverty and losing employees into our business. And in terms of the S part of the ESGs, so that's concerned about the stakeholder that are the humans, who are mainly they are followers of our business. So they are the key stakeholder of our business. In order to actually help them, there are three areas of things that we are working on every day. The first part is we're trying to find data sources that will help us evaluate their risk, so that we can extend loans to as many people as possible if they need the money. So the second part is when we have the data sources that we find for them, we will try to extract the signals from those data sources. The signal that can be indicative of their risk. So that's where help us decide whether we want to extend the loans to their product. And the last part is we apply the AI and the machine learning part to those signals, so that we can generate a score. Internally, we call it a score. And we use this score to actually gauge the risk of the customers. And this score will tell us whether we want to extend the loan to them. That's the technical part of the ESGs. And in order to assess whether our approach is working or not, we internally track some metrics that will tell us whether how we can penetrate to the segment that we are trying to follow, to go after, which are the underserved segments. Some of the metrics that we track, for example, is the percentage of borrowers that are less than 25 years old. Statistically, banks only extend 3%. Among the borrowers of the banks, only 3% younger than 25 years old. But in our portfolio, 16% that are younger than 25 years old. And also, 67% of our borrowers have income less than $15,000 per month. And 40% of our borrowers were previously rejected by banks. And also, 30% of our borrowers previously borrowed from loan sharks. So these are the metrics that we actually celebrate, because it actually tells us that we are moving toward the right direction toward the sustainability of our business.
Thank you, Dr. Natth. So it's all around thinking a little bit more deeply around how these models are affecting, who they're including, where is the disparity between the different social groups, and how you can actually achieve a little bit more evenness in the way you think about your business. I think is what I'm hearing from that. I'm gonna just ask Supawit for a second around the things that you're doing in Microsoft, because as we saw earlier, Dr.Shuki put in some kind of alarming stats when we ran like a ChatGPT model, and you know how much carbon emissions it's related to. That's a lot of million miles. I think 6.4 million miles. Is it? Yeah, that's a Google. Okay, maybe a bit less in Microsoft. So I want to hear, because you have a unique position, right? You're offering services, but you're also generating yourselves a lot of kind of interesting products. So I would like to understand a little bit from your lens what you're seeing and how Microsoft is tackling this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. So a little bit context of myself, right? My name is Supawit, so I'm part of the Microsoft Asia Pacific team, and I cover, some of the industry that are the major contributor to the carbon emission. Like, I have the privilege of working with the leading organization from energy industry, transportation industry, and logistics industry, right? And I came to know that, this thing has been on, the top priority for SCB, which is very, very exciting time. So with that, right, when we talk about sustainability, we probably hear, or have heard a lot of, standard ESG, CDP, E100, like so many terminology, you could name it, right? But I think, for us, Microsoft, we think of sustainability as something that, meaningful from the environmental perspective, social perspective, and also governance perspective as well. But the most important thing is how can we make sure that this mind share is aligned from the top management to the people at the operation. And the most importantly, how can we make money from doing this? Because, if everything is involved with additional investment and we cannot translate that into the value, that's not sustainable in how we run our business, right? And so that's how we see sustainability. And in fact, I think you all probably know Microsoft so well, right? We used to be known as a company that sell like licensing company. We have like Excel that everybody loves, and then PowerPoint, all of those things, right? And I would say, like 10 years ago, we were trying to change our business model, right, to become a cloud service provider. And by doing that, we were basically assessing the risk that we could potentially impact from changing our business model. And one of them was basically by becoming the cloud service provider. Our mission is to be the compute of the world. And that means that we need to have so many data centers as much as possible in our region. And because of that, there's going to be some upside and some downside, right? And potentially could be the downside is our impact on the sustainability, right? And when we talk about sustainability, we also compile to the standard of the ESG. The environmental will be the major impact that we consider because with our data center footprint, how much water do we consume, how much electricity do we consume, and also how much waste that we'll produce, right, in each of the region. And that's going to impact the value chain that we have in the country and also in the region as well. So that's number one. Number two, for its perspective, we talk about our internal employee a lot and how we make sure that the well-being of our employee, and also ensure that with that well-being we take diversity, inclusion, and allyship into how we engage with our supplier, with our employee. And the last one, which is the governance, right, cybersecurity, risk mitigation. So those are so many elements that we had to take in place back then. And then, I would say, let's take it into maybe like two main categories. Number one category is how do we have visibility of how we are performing in each of these categories, right? And the second one, we then use that information to make the right decision at the time to approach that problem statement. And I would say without visibility on how we're doing today, it would be so hard for us to justify the investment into each of the areas. And I would say when we started, back then 10 years ago, we used a tool that everybody loves, which is Excel. Excel is a great tool to track everything, but it's not so great when it comes to like tracking the activities for people around the world, right? And if you are familiar with, for example, take one category for carbon emission. Microsoft has a goal to become carbon negative by 2030. by far it's just only 8 years left that we need to reach that goal. And I'll tell you a little bit more later why we set up the goal more aggressively than other people in the industry. So back then we basically used like Excel to track it, and the way we publish our sustainability report, basically we follow the ISO standard measurement, record, and validation process, right? The process of measurement and record takes about 3 to 4 months maximum. You can just keep sending emails, chasing people, and that's fine. But the validation process would be need to work with our third party to validate our logic thinking, right, behind that calculation model, take years. And because of that, we were able to just produce a report once a year. And if you search on Google or Bing, you will see that sustainability progressed on Microsoft, maybe back in 2009. It goes up, it went up, it went down, and it went up, and it went down. Because we lack of the real-time visibility of how we are performing at the moment, right? So I just want to emphasize the importance of the visibility, and then we can use that to take the next action. And I think the mind share from the management to the people at the operation will be a very important role. We need to create that mind share and make sure that ESG or sustainability is the responsibility of everyone in the organization, not just the senior leadership.
Thanks for it. And I think just hearing what you said there and how that transition in your business, the Microsoft business, and how you have to readjust and reposture yourself, and then the instrumentation is important. And I wanted to just kind of piggyback on that instrumentation piece. And Alison, I was again fortunate to speak to her this morning, and she was telling me about satellite images. So I just want to, from your lens, Alison, I wanted to also understand. You said, right, you've seen that transition. You've seen organizations go from the sidelines to bring kind of sustainability and ESG into the main agenda. From your observations and what you've seen, how is data, and maybe even the kind of use of analytics or AI, become part of that mission, part of that kind of approach?
Yeah, so we're going to take that in 2 parts. So, I think that what we're seeing, again, ESG is important because in most companies it's regulated, and it is at the moment, even with all of the myriad of standards and the challenges with data, it is the way globally that people are looking at how we are progressing, and the sustainability reports are the basic in terms of what people need to do. Then what we see happening, there is an increasing body of evidence, it's very, very interesting, around how having strong, consistent ESG scores actually impacts your operating margin. So, operating margin and return to shareholders. Now, I'm talking to people here who know a lot about statistics and data, and so again, it's an emerging body of evidence. There is a very interesting study with kind of ABACUS, Standard & Poor's and Accenture. It was done last year, and it's kind of multi-year, which is showing this, and there are multi-studies now showing this. And it's one of the reasons why, and again, it's the data that's proving, one of the reasons why, and Dr. Natth kind of mentioned, not only the ESG, which tend to be input scores, it's not output, it's not really what the impact is. Impact investing, because people are starting to see the correlation between having kind of a focus and stronger performance. Impact investing is now the highest in terms of funds. Impact funds are the highest growth fund area in the US at the moment. Yeah? Because people are moving even beyond ESG, which is the input, the basic, to hey, how does this create impact? How does this actually translate into results? And the challenge with that is that's multi-year assessment, because it's looking at things like, do you create more jobs? Do you create more employment? Do you create better health outcomes? That's super, super difficult from a data perspective. But what we see is we do see a lot of companies setting up not only a sustainability report, but actually inside all of their functional areas. And I think it was mentioned about supply chains. So supply chains in particular, if you start to look at data of supply chains, and you need to, because for your scope 3 you're going to have to start tracking this, and for your carbon, 70%, typically between 60 and 70% of carbon footprints are coming from your supply chains. There is a lot of monitoring and management, not just of the ESG, but of the whole process that companies are starting to think through. And people are also starting to think through, okay, is there a business here that I can create, particularly around supply chains, that kind of links all of my suppliers, where I can help to provide them with support, with platform, with information, with funding, to kind of move to new models. There's a lot of thinking around that. So again, supply chains is big, technology is big, and everybody hears about carbon in the data center. What people don't talk about is how you architect, and architectural technology has an impact on its carbon footprint. Again, so there is a how you think about the architecture, how you code, all of this has an impact. And I think companies are starting to really think about this because it does have an impact on your bottom line. It's been required by the regulators. Consumers are increasingly asking questions. Not clear yet whether they pay more, but they're asking questions. And so what I've seen, Ramine, is a big shift from it being something on the side to it becoming something that's core to every single functional area and every business leader within an organisation.
Thank you, Alison. And I think that quite a few of those words resonated. And I think one of them is, I'm going to ask Dennis about, is architect and architecture. I'm sure you at least one meeting a day, you get that in your world. So just going on kind of what Alison was mentioning around, it's becoming core to the business, core to the way they think about the design of technology. In your role at SCBX, how do you see that factoring in? Where are you seeing that transition? If you do, how does it come into fruition, and what are you doing to kind of make it meaningful as well and systematic?
So I think it's a good question, right? And I think it's an emerging thing where we're also starting to learn. Have we cracked it fully yet? I don't think so. Are we trying? Yes. So I think it starts with more of the easier things when you think about like at least letting things around ESG impact your technology decisions and the way you look at it. I just mentioned earlier, for instance, we are about to set up our account center of excellence, which will number one help us to transition the group to run on the cloud by 70%. That's our goal in 3 years. But more importantly, also help us to use the cloud technology most efficiently. Don't produce too much waste. Run it efficiently. Don't use compute that you don't need, right? Which also has an impact. But that's for me the baby steps. Right? That's the start of the journey, basically. The next part then is to think about, and that's just emerging, is to think about like how can we use technologies and technology architecture to improve operational effectiveness of all of our processes, basically, where obviously there's a cost benefit to it, but there's also an impact on sustainability. Obviously DataX will play a big role in that, helping us to figure out how do we do that, how do we deploy data and artificial intelligence to help us to do so. But then it's also about like how do we actually set up our application architecture, how do we think about that from the perspective of making sure we think about it holistically, and then last but not least also how can we use these technologies to help to upskill, reskill, and bring other people into our workforce, because even though we talk a lot about data and AI, and we saw a lot of robots earlier today, we will still need people with different roles. So I don't think I have the final answer to your questions, but I can tell you it's something that we think about, something where we take some initial steps and where we're trying to learn, trying to understand how we can do that. And it's probably going to take us quite a while, particularly thinking about how do we run and govern, where we have a lot of like companies that kind of like have their own journey. We from the group take care of certain things, and we try to overlay all of this, right? But it's something that we think about definitely.
Thank you. Dennis. And it's the open questions and the questions you're asking to really make you think about this, and then you put the effort into that. And I think I appreciate that kind of response. I think, Dr. Natth, I'm going to be a bit of a black hat here and say, what are the challenges, right? We hear from Dennis, we hear from Alison and Supawit. It's like, these are the great things that we can do. We can use instrumentation, we have data, but the reality is on the ground, when you get to do things, there's challenges there. And I think in your world, you're using data. Let's say you're building risk models, you're building credit scoring models. There's challenges in doing that. I think you already highlighted some of them to begin with. So from your perspective, when you're trying to, you've got this North Star of trying to help society and helping the environment, but hands on the ground, you've got to do things. So what are the challenges you're facing to get yourself to that position?
I think the main challenge that we are actually seeing every day is the amount of data, because even for the model to actually learn the credit worthiness or the risk of our customers, they need to see real data. That's mean we have to try giving our loans to them and see whether they repay the loans. So that's going to be the important data for the model to actually pick up the correlations of what type of customers are good, what type of customers are bad. By applying technology into our products, we can actually do that. By if we are not confident, if they will be a good borrowers, we can try to give them small amount loan, like 800 won, and see whether they repay back that amount over time. And then we have experiment running like this a lot to learn about new types of customers that we haven't seen before. And over time, we will pick up new types of customers that we can actually go after the underserved segments.
So it's about the representation of the population is a challenge, and thus your model will be skewed, and ultimately you're not going to be fairly kind of marking those within the type population. Maybe I think it's what I'm hearing. I think that's good because it's like on the ground challenges. And I also wanted to ask Supawit a little bit, put you on the spot, is around, you mentioned, right, you went through a transformation. The company did a shift, you're no longer just selling Excel, you're selling platforms and services, and SharePoint as well, sorry, I'm not just Excel. And, what is the challenge, obviously you can't speak for everything, but what are some of the challenges you face when you go through that inflection to, a completely new line of business, new way of thinking?
So talking about the challenges that basically, I think that's probably something that Microsoft has, been facing in the past as well, and also some common theme that we've seen with, our customer, related to the data. I think before I get into, the actual data collection part, I just want to say some context here. I think one of the challenge from the operation that we, when we talk about sustainability reporting, especially the data collection. People tend to think of sustainability reporting or data capturing as, one team responsibility. And if we have a CSR team within, our organization, we probably think that it's their responsibility, right? And that's not wrong. That's not wrong. That's how we did it, 10 years ago as well. But we found a major challenge when, after we collected the data, like what kind of policy do we need to put in place, right? And how often we get those data in, and then the more data we have, basically the better decision that we can make for sure, right? And if I were to maybe pick one example, for the company that just started to look into their sustainability report, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 3, I think let's just leave it for a moment because that's gonna be I probably need 2 more days just to talk about it. But if you want to focus on scope 1 and 2, the common low-hanging fruit would be the energy consumption of the building, right? And I kind of want to build on what I mentioned earlier, that from Microsoft we are looking at decarbonization strategy to visibility and then action. So the question is, if we want to have information about energy consumption, what we would do? We would go to our accounting team, ask for their data, they probably share in Excel format, and then in the, let's say, a yearly basis or monthly basis, right? And we take that information and then put together with some emission factor through the calculation model, have the estimated carbon emission. But then that's fine. We have the data, that's perfectly fine. But the question is the next step on the action. How do we reduce the energy consumption, right? So if we could have the near real-time data ingestions, either from the smart meter, or you already have the smart building solution, connect that, ingest daily, and put that information together with how the building is being utilized, the occupancy of our people, our employee, their well-being, their shift, will then have more visibility across the board. How the building is consuming the energy and how the building is being utilized. And we will then use this information, probably some insight, together to make some policy. For example, like in our campus in Redmond, we have about 125 buildings, and each building has different policy because the character of the people who use that building is very different. We probably set up the goal that okay, after 4 or 5 p.m. at the building that we use to welcome our customer, we shut off all the major electricity, and that's how we save energy, right? But for some buildings that have a lot of our engineers, we probably use more energy at night, because that's how they like to spend their time together, right? So I would say it comes back to the data, and when we talk about data, it's not just the data from the carbon emission or sustainability perspective, but overall data of the organization and supply chain, so we can then make the right decision towards the same goal.
Got it. And I hear a lot of the word data and kind of instrumentation. I'm going to ask Alison a question around how we actually use that, because I think one of the things that screams out to me from a data scientist, or if you're ever playing with data, is standards, right? And the challenge is you have 2 data producers and the standards are very different. Where you just gave a good example, which is you measure people in a building and those people are FTEs, but maybe an FTE to one organization is very different to another, the way you describe that. So I think, Alison, one of the kind of areas I wanted you to explore is and tell us some of those challenges in there is around standards, right? How do you compare apples to apples in this space? Because I imagine very difficult.
It's been very, very difficult because there are multiple standard authorities, and only in the past 12 months have we come to alignment around a global kind of set of standards. But already you have, I'm currently working with an organisation that has multiple businesses. And certain standards are better for certain industries. And this is a conglomerate, so it's got different rules, it's been very separated. And so that's a real challenge. So we're getting to a point where there is a standard set of taxonomies, which is obviously kind of very helpful. I think there is more and more support around definitions, actually from central banks in particular, as it relates to, and regulators, as it relates to ESG and what it is that they're looking for. And I think the Bank of Thailand is doing actually a good job on that. But I think the standards notwithstanding, let's assume that the taxonomies we get right, the challenge is the quality of the data and being able to make sure, how do you make sure that what is coming in is right? And in many cases, you don't have the data, particularly for SMEs. And even some large SMEs, it's very, very difficult to get that data. I was recently working with another organisation, and when we went in, it turned out it wasn't one organisation, it was 17 different entities. And so you're trying to do a report, pulling out of 17 different sources, and so all of that, those are the tactics, and it's incredibly difficult. It's actually incredibly difficult. There are no easy answers. There are kind of sectoral things that are emerging. So, for example, carbon is a very, very hot topic, but emissions overall, carbon and methane. And increasingly, people are using space data, so looking at kind of imagery to try and find, because that is probably the best, because for other data you're relying on kind of IoT or kind of behaviours. If you look at things from space and start to analyse, it's easier. And so you're seeing that, for methane in particular, you're starting to see the use of new sorts of data because it can be validated, but it's coming from places that people didn't imagine before. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I mean, that's kind of some of the things that are it's a very, very, very difficult area.
I think it does, and it also validates that I wasn't hallucinating when thinking about mentioning space. But I think what resonates to me, and one of the things you said, is the complexity within an organization. And I've got a bit of a question for Dennis on this, is around, you've got standards, you've got challenges in the ecosystem, but just even in your own world, sometimes it can be difficult. But Dennis, maybe if you can share some of the things that you're seeing within SCBX as a group, from the group level lens, like for sharing, to be able to be kind of interoperable and understand what the left and the right are doing. Where is the challenges, and what are some of the things that we can do to tackle that? Because I'm sure that's something on top of your mind.
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think we are a complex organization, and we are a complex organization that started on a big journey last year, right? Kind of like the year before, and we're in the first phase, right? So in terms of complexities, we are saying, obviously we're trying to figure out what is the right balance between freedom that the individual subsidiaries need in order to do what they need to do because they have a business model that they actually need to do the best thing for the business model, versus what do we have to control and influence from the center to, number one, add value overall to the organization, because we are more than the summary of our individual subsidiaries. Number two, where we have obligations from regulators, from shareholders, from others, basically to make sure that we keep the freedom within certain constraints and boundaries to make sure that actually happens. And then number three, where can we actually add value? Because if you look at something that's actually quite common across the group, can we talk about it? So in terms of the complexities around that, I think we are at the very early stages of figuring that out. Obviously, we said, like, look, we identified 3 areas that we want to have a more aligned view. Data and AI is one of them. That's part of why we have DataX, and DataX is our center of excellence for it. We have cybersecurity and technology risk management, because that is also something that where we think we have to do a bit more from the center. And it also ties into ESG, because in our own ESG strategy, security actually plays a quite big role. So we look at that as well, and then I talked about it a couple of times. Where do I see challenges? I think it's a good challenge, because we created friction points between what the individual company needs to do and wants to do for their business versus what we do. But that creates, for me, is a positivity, because it creates good discussions and it creates good thinking, and it forces us to think about this more and more, and actually not just go and say we do it that way and just let it be. You have to think, you have to justify. So I think that's a challenge, but at the same time an opportunity, because me personally, I think it's always good to listen to as many possible points of view to come up with the best one. However, sometimes that also gives us a challenge in terms of, like, when do we really have to say, okay, this is what we're going to do now and stop it. This is the group direction and finish. We have to do it now, because if we have too much discussion, it might take us a little bit long. Right? What can we do? I think number one for us is, as I said, like, we're in the early stages, and we also need to create our group identity a bit more, and it's about people, right? In the end, everything is about people, and it's about aligning people, it's about common understanding, it's about creating the relationships, it's about, like, just knowing people and create that. And I think that's one thing that we definitely need to do, which will help us also with these ESG challenges and all the other things around it, because if we have a common understanding, a common mission, we align kind of what we do. Yes, there's nuances that we need to do a little bit different, but we're all pulling into the same direction. As I mentioned earlier, this is an important topic for us, and we take this very seriously. This is not just to get a stamp into under our annual report to say we have complied to X, Y, Z, because that's not what it's about, to me at least. To me, it's about, like, the impact, the opportunity. So very long-winded answer, but number one is, I think we're still learning, right? Number two is, it's about it's about creating common values and common direction that will help us to go. And then number 3, I think discussion and unalignment sometimes creates very good outcomes because it makes you think.
I appreciate that. I think it's a great answer. And I think the recipe for success, I think many people want to learn from you once you crack that piece of it. Because I know it's complex and you've got to deal with many, many different factors. And on that note, I was just thinking about success and growth. And I wanted to ask actually, Alison, again, you've seen a lot of clients in this space growing and moving their agenda and how they brought that kind of sustainability and ESG piece in front of them. What are the areas of growth, right? What are the things that we can do in this?
So first of all, everybody's dealing with exactly the problems. There is no one super far ahead. I really don't think. I mean, there are companies that say they are sustainable at the core, and those are probably the ones that everybody talks about, that have a product that is more sustainable. So there are kind of a number of clothing companies and things that we see. But I mean, everybody's kind of grappling with it. So what I've seen, I mean, where I think the action is, the activity is, there's an enormous amount of activity around carbon and around carbon markets and around what individual companies need to do around carbon and carbon pricing and how that's going to impact different business models. So carbon is an area that is a lot of confusion around. Challenges, everybody's doing something different in every country, so it doesn't, it's super challenging. So carbon is a big space, is a growth area. Consumer nudging, so again, when you talk about survival, it's about everybody playing a part, every company, every government, every individual. So nudging people through benefits, through giving them slightly kind of different pricing for things. So a lot of nudging we see in consumer space, actually also in banking, particularly nudging SMEs. Supply chains, I've already mentioned, that's a big space. And so, I mean, but there's no one has cracked it, honestly. And I think the one thing that everybody kind of agrees is it's not a one company thing. It's actually ecosystems, it's partnerships, it's unusual partnerships. So I think that the only other thing I would say is there are a lot of companies in our part of the world, and I'm working with one who grows pineapples. And there are a lot of challenges with a lot of the kind of maybe the legacy industries, but there's a lot of opportunity. So did you know that pineapple skin actually makes fantastic vegan leather? And the enzymes, and this is where the AI comes in, the enzymes that you find within a lot of pineapple is very, very good for different things related to health. Also the same, I work with a tobacco company, and of course that is a real sunset industry, but where there are a lot of things in the tobacco plant that are being looked at for health. And that's when you start to do compound analysis and you start to do scientific analysis of what's in the compound. So there's a lot of innovation and scientific innovation that's really interesting. Some because people are interested, some because they're a bit desperate, their industries are really sunset. But it's a space where I think the more conversations like this and the more each individual wants to learn, the more everybody educates themselves, does things individually and collectively, the more, the better we all become and the greater chance we have of surviving.
Thank you, Alison. I was going to crack a joke about pineapples, but not now. Before that, everyone's already hungry. I think what you said there, it's the ecosystem, right? It's from the individual all the way to the kind of the corporates and society. And I think it goes back to the first thing, survival, right? We've got to be survived together. I'm conscious that we have 5 minutes left, and I want to ask the panel, they're going to do their key takeaway nuggets, 30 seconds each pitch. But before I do that, are there any questions from the audience? Because you guys have been very nice and sat there quietly and didn't ask anything nasty. And I always start, Dr.Shuki has one.
How we protect the poor or the poor countries, that because the rich countries are putting their radio, how do you say it, the nuclear garbage in places where nobody can protest, production is moved by nature to low salary countries and polluting. We are very privileged, even as a bank, we can decide that we move to glass cups instead of paper, but it's not. So do countries or governments or UNs take a step, because I think without it, the poor will get more polluted and more.
I think that's,
I think it is the question, and it's actually, if anything, things are getting worse, because everybody's signed up to the Paris Climate Accord 8 years ago. It's legally binding. People signed up, and very few countries or companies are actually doing what they said they would. So it's a massive issue, and the impact is here. The impact is in Southeast Asia. We have the biggest plastic pollution on the planet. We have the biggest gap between on the SDGs on the social scale, particularly in Indonesia, and we have so many challenges, and we need the global north, which I come from, and I'm quite ashamed to say, we need the global north to actually stop polluting the rest of the world. And then we need help. It's very interesting. There is some really profound things. Firstly, that governments need to do, but some very interesting things on energy and carbon sequestration. And I have a client, this amazing client, who's educating me a lot on the environment. And did you know, I didn't know this, but there are 3 tropical forests in the world that have the right kind of vegetation to sequester the carbon. And forests are not the best, right? Actually, they're finding more and more is in oceans and different things. But there are 3 massive forests. One in the Amazon, and they just keep cutting that terribly, just awful. One in Congo, where there is massive fighting. Look, there's constant war. It's very, very challenging. And then in Indonesia, right? In Indonesia. And so there is a very, very big push on at the moment in Indonesia to actually do something. And the government, Jokowi, it could be part of his legacy, to actually do something around the reforestation of these trees. So that's a tiny thing, but it takes time and it takes everyone coming together. And we need to all start saying no, because it's us that are being impacted. And you're right, it's the poor people always that are impacted. Climate change is impacting poor people. They're losing their homes, there's more disease. It's just so terribly unfair. And that's why I say, we need to all say, okay, stop now. What can we do individually? What can we do collectively? And how do we make sure we all survive, not just the rich folks? Sorry,
Thank you, Dr.Shuki, thank you, Alison. I think it's a sobering question, right? It's the reality, right? There's a divide in society globally. Each individual action makes a difference. And I think we were saying this, you get in a car, do you get in a car with someone else, or do you have 2 taxis? Those small micro changes are the things.
But on the positive side, the ESG, and actually starting to do things, asking the question, figuring out what we can all do. That's a start, that's brilliant. That's a start, and there is a glimmer of hope, which there is some amazing new renewable technology, that if the world can get onto it fast and stop polluting, there's a lot that can be done even in the next few years. But again, the time window is extremely short.
I think you said it's our streaming and acting now. Okay, I'm good. Before I get... Oh, I have one more question. Excellent. Maybe I'll get up to the exercise.
Hi, thanks everyone for sharing insights today. It's been really useful from the technology experts. So as some context, right, let me have a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Idan, and I'm helping Dennis with COE setup. Cloud COE is one of them. So I think for today's questions, I have two questions, and I think it's more for our technology expert partners. I think the first one would be with the ESG in conjunction with technology, right? I think there are lots of areas to tackle. You said supply chain, infrastructure, and all that. But if I want it to be a very, very practical start, like if I want to start, make it live on sustainably, and pick only one area as a key priorities, I think what would be your suggestion? I think that's the first question. The second question would be, I think it's very, very early stage, but we say at the end of the day, we have to make money, we have to monetize out of it. So from your perspective, how do you see that could make money, or like what kind of business model or something that from your perspective and experience with other business that could be useful to share? Yeah, I think that's my two key questions.
Maybe,
Okay, so maybe I'll take this too. But feel free to chime in if you have additional question answer. So I think that the first question is, some of the key takeaways, right? Especially I think from Microsoft. I'm just going to answer in short, but for the longer detail, you can search Microsoft Sustainability Report. We publish that every year, and in that sustainability, we cover carbon negative growth, water positive, and zero waste. So these are the three main areas when we talk about environmental aspect of the ESG. But we also have SNG included as well. So I think aside from the reporting, I think we are all clear in terms of how important the visibility is, right? But in terms of like reducing the carbon emission, I would say a lot of people think about buying carbon credit, and we do too, right? But the reality is the renewable energy and carbon credit nowadays are very limited. And each region have very different standard of how they recognize it, and have a very different variety of conditions of investing in the next few years. For example, when we talk about renewable energy in Thailand, probably the wind is not going to be as strong as Vietnam. Solar, we're not going to be able to produce as much as some other country, or we don't have enough hydropower compared to Laos PDR. So those are very, very limited, right? So we need to think about ourselves, and I just want to emphasize, how complex Microsoft is, and the importance of working with the supplier, because eventually we talk about, we talk in the same language, so we know where we are today, and then we can make the goal, the progress collectively together. So in terms of the key takeaway from our experience, I would say number one priority. Reduce the energy consumption for the building. That's the first one. Second one, we talk a lot about enforcement, right? And in that enforcement perspective, we need to make sure that the decision for sustainability is being enforced and aligned from the top management to the people at the operation. And when we talk about that, people only care about their performance, right? I only care about my performance. And when we talk about performance, that's typically, result in the form of number, right? And that in that number, we talk about P&L, profit and loss, how that business unit is performing. So, to make sure that we really align and making sure that, that's only number that people care. We see a lot of, organizations, including Microsoft, we implemented something called internal carbon tax. And in that internal carbon tax, basically, we build a dashboard, and then together with the P&L of that business unit, and then put some additional tax on top, and that would be the result of how that business unit is performing, and that would drive the collective activities toward the same goal. For example, 5 years ago, we started first with applying the tax for business trip. For example, if I have the budget of $100, I'll need to make a choice of 2 flights. I'll probably choose the cheapest one because that's the policy, right? But after we apply the carbon tax on top, the cheapest one might not be the option anymore. So that's how we drive the action into every area of the business at the operation level. So that's the second area, right? The third area, and which is related to your second question of how we convert our investment into a new opportunity. For us, Microsoft, right? Because we have a goal to become carbon negative by 2030. So by a lot of organizations that are using our cloud services, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whether it's Microsoft Azure, we are essentially your supplier. So we are accountable, but of providing the transparency of the carbon emission to yourself as well. So that's, by us becoming carbon negative, we're also receiving that benefit directly. Both Microsoft Teams, Office 365, and Microsoft Azure. There is a dashboard that the admin of the tenant can have access to. So that's the third one. And then the next one, which is related to how we drive our supply chain in the past, I think 5 to 10 years, which is the sustainable supply chain network. How we select the supplier that we want to work with. And typically we talk about pricing, performance, any feedback if they're already our supplier. We created a new category in our supplier code of conduct that we need to disclose your carbon emission to us. Because that's something that matters to us as well, and that's how we make the decision when we award the contract to a particular supplier. And we start to see a lot of our customers starting to make a decision based on that as well. And just want to highlight on that one a little bit, which is directly to the second question. Every situation comes an opportunity, and even now when we talk about the sustainability as a key driver to drive across industry for how what would the new operating model look like for them. That also created a new opportunity for that particular industry for any new player that can come in, help them to be more sustainable. So that's how we're seeing this.
Thank you, Supawit. Alison, do you want to add anything around business models to this as well? Oh, yeah, sure,
So I think ESG does not create us for making profit, so that relates to your second question. It's actually aligned with how we make profit from a lending business, for example. So let's say every lender try to give our loan to the same persons. That can create a problem because if they can default on loans, they can default on the lenders, and we all lose. So that's mean each individual lender has to carefully evaluate the affordabilities, whether they can repay back loan or not, and prevent them from having existing debts. So that's how we win. Each lender will win because they will still have an income to pay back loan to each lender, and also still have a good quality of life.
So just kind of two thoughts. There's loads that can be done on helping the bank become more operationally efficient across kind of all the areas. But in terms of new opportunity areas, again, if it's a service, there's probably quite a lot. Now, how you monetize it is a question, but there's increasingly a number of models around SME, sustainability as a service for SMEs, and there's different models that I've seen. We've started doing something with the Singapore government around this. And so it's a suite of services, and it's actually attractive to banks. So because, again, if you've got people who are, again, the body of evidence that I talk about, increasingly people are more ESG compliant, they're likely to be better credit worthiness. So I think that's what Dr. Natth was suggesting as well. So that's a big kind of area. And then another area is look not at the SMEs, but look at the big customers. So when you start to look at some of your bigger customers, we did this with one of the oil and gas majors actually with our friends from Microsoft, and we actually set up a new business together because we realized that they have a massive, it was very shocking, they have a massive shipping fleet, one of the biggest shipping fleets in the world. And actually shipping is a massive polluter, it's a massive kind of creator of carbon, but it was also costing them a huge amount because it was only 40% used. So we created very simply, but using a lot of data, a lot of AI, we created a new model, like a control tower, we call it Uber for the Seas. It's now active in the South China Sea. It's becoming active in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's looking at, kind of route planning, deviations, real-time data, real-time insights to create a whole new industry that has kind of massive carbon impact and actually is a real business enabler and a real business service that where this client is saving a lot of money, but also is able to then sell it to other kind of oil companies, oil majors around the world. So that's where I would look, the SMEs, but also some of your bigger clients to see what the opportunities could be.
Thank you, Alison. So, I think we're beyond the top of the hour. We're now taking into a little bit of someone's lunch or the food that's over there. I'm going to ask each of the panelists, 20 seconds, wrap up, key takeaway for the audience for them to share and to think about as they go home.
Okay. Relieved and curious. Relieved because when I came to this panel, I thought like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm hearing I'm not the only one. And who have cracked how we actually handle this for the company, right? And we're not the only one with it. And curious because it sounds like there's still a lot of thinking that needs to be done and a lot of things that need to be done, and that's something that excites me.
There are still tens of millions of people in Thailand who are still in poverty. They are in a vicious cycle because they have to borrow from low chance and they not really get out of that. I think this era with the advancement in technology, with the new paradigm shift, I think we are excited that ever to actually try to leverage that kind of technology to actually help solve the financial inclusion in Thailand. But SCBX alone cannot help that, and we are too small to do that. People in Thailand.
Thank you. So I started off very negative, the ESG, everyone's survival goal. But as you listen, it's super. There's so much that can be done, and technology and insights and data has a huge part to play. And so I think it is something that's just if we can all just get together, we can solve it. So it's everyone. For me, it's about how we can all kind of create kind of the right legacy for kind of what comes after us.
So maybe just only two things I just want to leave you with, right? Number one, sustainability should be the core, priority for everyone, every role in the organization, because it's a collective effort, right? And number two, I think we should put sustainability as the business outcome rather than a separate pillar of pursuit. Because sustainability should be one of the business outcomes, just like how you want to reduce your costs, improve revenue, and how can you see digital transformation as a platform for you to accelerate that outcome. And if you're interested in we have a story that we can share, but maybe more later.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So we